Okay, so I'm going to show you how to get started in Adobe Animate. You're going to find your Adobe Animate icon down in your taskbar, and you're going to click on it to open it. Um, as it's loading, you'll probably see a splash page um, that opens up. The splash page is usually one of those before it goes like into a document or something. It gets you seeing what previous projects you had. Um, if you want to create a new one, some options available to you. Um, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to create new because I want to set some parameters by which we are actually going to set these up. So we're create new. And because the computers, have a fair amount of memory, but we want to conserve on memory. Um, when you put create new, a window like this will appear where it says new document at the top. And if you go through, you'll see social, game, education. There's a lot of different presets for different sized documents. Come back to character animation up at the top here, and look where it says standard, 640 pixels by 480 pixels. That's what we're going to use. Okay, we could go full HD, 1920 by 1080, which is a very large file. So you want to make sure that you're actually just for class purposes, instruction purposes, working in 640 by 480. Okay. So you click that to select that. The frame rate that we're going to use, the default is 30, but we're going to actually type in 24. Okay, and you're going to hit create. All right. So when your workspace first appears, there's going to be a bunch of information that's on here, and we're going to clarify each of these different things as we go through different projects. Okay, but so that we're all on the same page, we're going to come up to the very top corner up here, and there is a little rectangle with a little white line on the side, looks like a toolbar. If you hover over it, it says Workspaces. You're going to click on that button, and where it says these are different sort of workspace layouts. Okay, so there's Animator, Basic, Classic, Debug, etc. We're going to click on Basic. Okay, and what it'll do is it'll kind of streamline the amount of stuff you're looking at and allow us to focus on really just the main things in Animate that we are going to be working on in this class. So we'll click on Basic, and it'll set it up in this way. Going through just to kind of outline a couple of things that you're seeing that are going to be very important that we're going to be working with in our projects. Down here on the bottom, very important concept as we've been thinking about timing and spacing and how animations work with this idea of individual images playing through time. Right? Each time a change is made, it allows for this persistence of vision to kind of trick our eye into creating a sense of motion. Right? We have what is called the timeline. This little blue line right here, this is called the scrubber bar. And as we add more frames, we'll be able to go back and forth with that scrubbing through our timeline to different frames that we create. Okay? So the timeline, very important. Okay? We also, by default, you should see up here, there's some tabs going on, right? So we have our Properties tab. So if I click on a tool, for instance, let's say, if I hover over it, the classic brush tool, and I click on that, notice that in the Properties tab, it is now highlighted that it's a tool, and you can see all of these different properties associated. So for instance, we have fill. So if I want to have my paintbrush fill in black, I would click on fill, and I would select black, and there you go. Okay, we also have the size of the brush. So down here, right, how big or small the brush is. I can be as small as 1 pixel, which is very, 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 very thin line. Or I can, make it a little larger, allowing for some pressure and line weight changes. We'll go into that in a minute. We also have this thing called smoothing, which I'm also going to explain in a minute. But I just want to show you, right, that each different tool that you click on in the Properties tab will have its own set of properties. Okay? So just getting started now, using your tablet, I do want you to click on the brush tool, okay, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of a rundown of different ways of thinking about the brush, okay. We're, for our first assignment, going to be creating a couple of different bouncing balls, and those balls, right, are going to bounce at different rates based on the first couple of lessons that we were looking at. about timing and spacing. So we're really going to focus on that. So the brush, first thing I want you to do is I want you to click on the fill, and I want you to select any color you want. It really will not matter at this time. Okay, I'm just going to click black for now. And I'm going to come over to the size, and I'm going to adjust it. I like to, I'm going to hover in around maybe 6, 7, 8 pixels, somewhere around there. So 7, sure. Okay, fine. And the smoothing, I'm going to explain right now too. So if I have 0 smoothing, if I bring it all the way down to smoothing, and I paint a line, right, it kind of paints exactly what, right, I did. Okay. If I make it go all the way up to 100, notice the difference. What it does is it kind of like smooths out the edges. So see the difference in the line, how the one that's at 100% makes it so that there's less little bumps or jags in there. Okay, so some animators like it because it kind of really smooths out. I typically end up a little bit, about halfway, maybe a little more than halfway, 55, 53, somewhere around there, because I like it to smooth it out a little bit, but I also like to kind of keep, the edges of my lines working the way that I want to draw with them. Okay, so I've just drawn a bunch of lines on there explaining. If I want to get rid of a bunch of things quickly on the stage, a couple of things you can do. Notice down in the timeline that first frame now has a black circle in it. We call this a keyframe. Okay, we're going to cover that a little bit more later. But on that keyframe, I could just click directly on it, and notice there's all these little teeny white dots now that are on all the images that are inside of that frame. So one quick way, click on the keyframe that you're drawing on, and then I just hit delete. Okay, and that deleted everything from there. Okay. Another way to do it is if I was clicking on the, I drew some lines. You could use the eraser tool, which is another tool. So if you don't want to erase everything, right, I can click. You can also see the eraser's properties, right? How big, if I want a different shape of it, how, again, the size that you have of the eraser itself, and there's some other presets in there as well. Okay, we'll cover those maybe later, but right now just know that you can use the eraser tool if I want to erase a portion of a line. Okay, or you can also hit Control A, which is a way of selecting all. I'm sorry, Command A, which is a way of selecting all, and then hitting delete on your keyboard. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to draw a rubber ball, or a ball. Okay. So I'm going to click. Notice the pressure is really sensitive right there. I'm going to also hotkey that you can use, and we've set this up on your tablet as well, is Command Z, which undoes something very quickly. So on my keyboard, if I draw something and I don't like it, Command Z. So the size is too big on my brush, so I'm coming down to about 7 or so. And now I'm going to draw a ball. Okay. Or if it's not perfectly round, whatever. Okay, we're just doing a little quick demonstration. Okay, if you really, really, really wanted a perfect ball, you could click on this tool over here, which is the shape tool. I could click to where it says oval tool, and I could hold my shift key down, click and drag, and it's going to draw a perfectly shaped circle. Okay, but it looks a little too mechanical for me. Okay, so I'm going to I like the idea that we can just draw things, but if you prefer, you can use that tool. That's fine. Okay. So I've got my brush, I'm drawing a circle, good enough. Actually, no, I'm going to do it one more time. One more time. All right, so as you can see, I'm just hitting Command Z and really just kind of quickly getting rid of what I just drew. Sometimes it's hard with the tablet to get it exactly the way you want it, but you can see how easily you can revise something. All right, I'm going to leave it at that for now. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is about the fill. Okay, so if I click here on the paint bucket tool, okay, and I'm just going to change the color so you can see down here there's the fill color, but you can also see it in the property window up here. So there's fill here, there's also fill down here, kind of mimicking what Adobe Photoshop So if I click on any color, and then with my paint bucket tool, click, it will fill the inside of what I drew. Okay, I'm going to click back, go back to black for a second. I'm going to paint again, but this time I'm going to come and I'm going to make it so it just barely, there's a little bit of a gap right there. Okay, if I click on the fill tool now and I click, notice it doesn't fill. It doesn't want to, it thinks there's too much background and it can't fill in the shape outside of the background, so it doesn't fill, nothing. So if that happens, you've got two options. One, you can come in, make sure that you actually fill that gap, okay? If there was a gap, make sure you fill it. Then you can click on it and fill it in. Or another thing you can do is down here, there's a button. It looks like a little square, okay? And you notice it says don't close gaps, close small gaps, close medium gaps, close large gaps. You may be able to fill in. If I click close large gap, again, I'll change to a different color here, and I click on the paint bucket tool. Notice it was able to fill in even though there was a gap there. Okay, so sometimes when you're doing drawings and it's not filling properly because you have a little bit of a gap because you sketch it out, whatever, that's a quick way to remedy that issue. Okay, so I'm going to put it back to don't close gaps. I'm going to use this other tool called the selection tool. And there's a couple different types of selection tools. So the selection tool allows me to click, hold, and draw around something. So I can easily, quickly select something. Okay, so see how I'm doing that? But sometimes I might accidentally select something else that's next to it, so I could also use the lasso tool, which allows me to get a little bit more particular of how I'm selecting it. Again, you know it's selected because you can see all those little dots on it. And then I can delete. Okay? Make sense? Okay. So what we'll do, once we have our rubber ball drawn, okay, we're going to actually do this next step, which is to convert it into a symbol. And we're going to get more in depth about what symbols are later in a couple of other lessons. But for now, you're just going to have to trust me and you're going to follow through what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this object, make sure, and again, the fastest way to do it is either to hit Command A if there's only one thing on the stage, or if it's a single frame, I'm going to click on it directly, or I could use a lasso tool, right? Any way you want to select it, make sure it's selected. Then I'm going to come up to the menu where it says Modify, and I'm going to click Convert to Symbol. Okay, and I'm going to name this Rubber Ball, and I'm going to keep the type a movie clip, and I'm going to click OK. Now what you'll see is that there's actually a blue box around the outside of your drawing, okay? And if I try to draw or color or do anything with this right now, notice, right, if I'm drawing on top of it, it almost hides behind it because there's actually, if I click on the selection tool, click on this and move it, it's its own separate object right now, okay, that cannot be edited in this way, okay? The only way to edit it, and I'll just erase that other part here, okay, is to actually use my selection tool, the black arrow, okay, and if I double click right on the object, notice up here where it says Scene 1, it now says Rubber Ball. This means that I am inside of that symbol on a separate timeline that allows me to edit the graphics inside of it, okay? So if I wanted to, in here, change the color of this ball, right, I could select on just the blue there, delete it. I could come with my paint bucket tool, and I could pick a different color. I wanted a red rubber ball, and I could fill, okay? So then when I come back to Scene 1, up at the top here, right, notice you see that blue line around the outside edge. This allows me, again, to work on the Scene 1 timeline in that individual keyframe, okay? So we have it converted to a symbol. So now we're going to get into a little bit of animation. Let's move our ball up to the top of our screen up here, and I'll just show you another tool. It's called the Free Transform tool. So if I click on it, and then I click on my symbol, and I hold the Shift key down and drag from the corner, I can actually make that slightly smaller, or I can make it bigger. I can also do things like by dragging from the side, I can squash and stretch it, which we're going to get into a little bit later. later. But for the most part, just you want to about as big as you see on the screen right here. Okay, so if you drew a really big ball, make it a little bit smaller so that we have room to actually animate. Okay, so you're going to put your ball up towards the top of the screen, and we're going to come down here to our timeline. You're going to count over 2 frames. We're going to call this drawing on the twos. And notice it's highlighted blue right here. A couple different ways I can insert what we're going to call a keyframe. Okay, you can go up to Insert, Timeline, look for Keyframe, okay, and click it. That's one way. Okay, and what it does is it copies an instance of what's on that first keyframe, and it makes a copy of it. Okay? But what it also allows us to do is it allows us to reposition that in some way. So I'm going to click on my selection tool, and I'm just going to drag this a little bit lower, okay, like that. So notice if I come back to the first keyframe, it's higher, and now when I click on the second frame, it's a little lower because it was a second copy of it that I was allowed to move. So I'm going to do this again. I'm going to click on the next 2 keyframes over, which is frame 5, and I'm going to also, you can right click or control click for max, okay, on that space. So if I just hit control on my keyboard and click on it, it also brings up a menu, and I can insert keyframe, okay, and now I can drag this a little bit lower. Now we're going to be working on this idea, we've been talking about this idea of timing and spacing. So if I look at the first one, and the second one, and the third frame as I'm coming down, I'm kind of making them fall. They're going to be a certain rate of speed that I want this to fall. Okay. Right now I can't see the relationship of the first frame next to the second frame next to the third frame. So we're going to turn on what is called onion skin. So over here in the timeline window, there are 2 little circles. One looks like a little grayed out. This is called the onion skin. Okay. So I'm going to click on it, and notice if I click back to the first frame, we have the actual red ball, and then just below it is actually the frame directly after it. If I click on the second frame over, notice you can see 2 grayed out images, right? That is the frame that's happening before and the keyframe that's happening after, okay? So this gives me a sense of the spacing that's happening in between each of these frames, okay? The timing is consistent. We're basically saying every, well, for 24 frames per second over 2 frames, really it's a 12th of a second, right? Thinking about our persistent vision, how that happens is going to start to trick our eye. But in terms of the spacing, to make something look faster, we make it move a little farther apart, okay? The spacing tends to be wider, okay? So notice the distance between the first and the second is a little closer, just touching, and the distance between the second and the third one is down a little bit farther than that, okay? And so now I'm going to add a 4th frame. So I'm going to insert keyframe, and I'm going to drag this kind of down, not touching the bottom of the screen, but almost like I'm going to imagine that it's just hitting the ground right here, okay? Now once it hits the ground, boom, it sets, and then it's going to bounce back up, okay? But for the most part, it kind of settles a little bit. So I'm going to click, I'm going to insert another keyframe, and I'm just going to move it down slightly, okay, as if it's kind of settling. And then I'm going to insert another keyframe, and I'm going to drag it up because it's springing up. It's kind of moving fast. And then I'm going to insert another keyframe, okay, and I'm going to, again, it's moving up, but gravity is starting to pull it down. So I'm not going to move it up as high this time. I'm going to kind of move it just so it's, the spacing between the balls I'm going to make a little less. And then I'm going to insert another keyframe, and I'm just going to move it up just a little bit more, and then I'm going to insert another keyframe, and I'll move it just slightly higher, and then I'm going to insert another keyframe. Now I'm going to come back down a little bit. So I'm going to, it's curving, like according to the video that we watched before, right? It's kind of making that top apex arc. And so they're closer together, and then they're closer together as it's coming back down the other way, and then it slowly starts to get more spacing as the momentum speeds up, as gravity is pulling it down. So I make it just a little bit lower, and then I'm going to insert a keyframe. I'm going to drag it just a a little more space than that. And then I'm going to insert another keyframe. And now I'm really going to create some space. Insert another keyframe. Drag it all the way down to where the bottom was. Again, since it just hit the bottom, we're going to insert a keyframe. Move it slightly lower, not that much. And then I'm going to insert another keyframe as if it's bouncing back up. Okay, but again, the momentum of it is starting to slow, so I'm going to insert another keyframe, and I'm going to drag it just a little bit higher, and then I'm going to insert another keyframe, just slightly higher than that. Again, so it's really getting pushed down on by gravity. Insert another keyframe, start coming the other way. Insert another keyframe, and now it's starting to come back down again, but just a slight, not trying to make it pick up too much speed yet. Insert another keyframe, definitely picking up speed to come down. And now insert another keyframe. I might move it slightly lower because it hit the ground. And insert another keyframe, bounce up slightly. Boom. Insert another keyframe. Just slightly higher, really getting pushed down on. It's losing its energy and momentum. Insert another keyframe, starting to come back down in that arc. Insert another keyframe, comes down, hits the ground. Insert another keyframe, slightly lower. Insert another keyframe. It just does a little teeny bit of a bounce. It just kind of comes up. Insert another keyframe, and it's kind of coming back down. Bum, bum. Insert another keyframe, a little slightly lower, and we'll have it come to rest there. Now, we've been inserting keyframes, but you can also insert what we call frames. Now notice in between each keyframe there's like a little grayed area. If I click directly on this last keyframe and I go to Insert Timeline, and I insert frame rather than keyframe, notice the hotkey is F5, and I just keep hitting, right, for my purposes, I'm going to hit F5 now. Okay, if I keep hitting F5, I'll just actually right-click on this. So insert frame, right? Notice what it's doing. Insert frame. It's inserting more frames, and that frame, right, is the same. The image is the same. Right? So from that keyframe, the image is the same on each of the frames until it gets to that last little slice of a dark line, right? That's saying that that image is playing in time for 1, 2, 3, 4 frames, okay? So I'm just going to do that for like maybe 10 frames. So I'm just going to keep extending that out, insert frame, or you can just hit F5, insert frame, okay? So now that I've got my kind of animation set here, I'm just going to hit enter and watch it play through. Okay, so essentially what we're getting is a sense of gravity and momentum. Okay, so the time it takes for each ball, that ball to kind of bounce, right, is the sort of the rhythm, you know, and by watching the video that is also posted with this assignment, you can get a sense of how that timing works, okay? But also watching the video and looking at the diagrams of each individual ball, look at the spacing that they have, right? How close together, how far apart? When are they close together? When are they far apart? Okay, and that's how you change the speed, okay, of an object as it's moving through time. Okay, so that's our first little lesson right now on the bouncing ball. We're going to get a little bit more in depth into this and how we might apply it to other concepts. But once you've completed this, you're going to go to File, Save As. You're going to give it your username. So in my case, S. Megan. And we're going to call this ball bounce. Okay. And then you're going to save this to your documents folder on your computer. Okay. And then you're going to turn this document in to Google Classroom. Okay. So you're going to hit save. Okay. Also, so it's easier for me to grade, I'm going to show you right now how you can convert this document a little bit later too. But right now, that is the end of the video.